Hi, my name is Meredith. I wasn't uninvited, just repositioned, shifted out of frame, cropped. They didn't say I didn't belong. They just handed me a tray instead of a seat, smiled while calling my birthmark brave, photographed me, then blurred me out. They said it was just a misunderstanding. But why did the uniform have my name stitched into the collar? And why did my own mother tell me to straighten it? What do you do when your family edits you out in real time, but expects you to smile like you're still part of the picture? The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and cold. Calligraphy that looked machine-made spelled out Delphine's name, and underneath, Bledsoe Family Garden Celebration. No birthday, no reason, just a celebration. Whatever that meant. There was no note, no, it's been too long, no warmth. Just an RSVP link and a dress code, elevated neutral. Exactly the kind of phrasing Delphine used to control without sounding controlling. For 2 days, I left it on the counter. I'd glance at it while making coffee, then look away, like a message from someone who only calls when they want something. On the 3rd day, I clicked yes. Added +1, though I had no one in mind. Maybe it just made me feel less alone. The night before, I stood in front of the mirror in a beige wrap dress I hadn't worn before. No concealer over my birthmark, just me. "You're not that scared little girl anymore," I told my reflection. "You're not here to beg for space." I drove 2 hours to Ashland. Last time I saw Delphine was nearly 4 years ago. Her parting words, "You just make everything so heavy, Mare." That was after she'd left me out of Mom's birthday group photo. "Bad lighting," she claimed. At the gate, a valet asked my name and waved me toward a side lot. The house rose like an art piece. White stone, glass, perfect. The garden was manicured, guests glowing under string lights and curated laughter. I felt like a smudge in someone else's picture. "Meredith!" my cousin Elise called, arms full of wine glasses. She smiled vaguely, then turned back to her tray. No hug. Then I saw her. Delphine. Effortless in white silk, rosé in hand, sunglasses like a tiara. "You came," she said, like she hadn't expected me to. "You invited me," I replied. She smiled. "Wasn't sure this would be your scene." "It's just a garden party, Delphine, not a deposition." Her eyes flickered. "Glad you're here. Drinks by the oak. We're doing photos later. Don't disappear." At the seating chart, I searched for my name. Row after row, nothing. "Is there a Meredith Hoyt?" I asked a young woman beside the board. She checked. "Not on this version. Maybe you're on the staff list?" Before I could respond, Delphine reappeared. "I figured you'd just float," she said. "You've always been good at helping, making people feel taken care of." Then I saw it. A small placard at the bottom. "Reserved. Staff." My name hadn't been forgotten. It had been moved. I gripped my clutch and smiled. Tight. Practiced. Delphine walked away. This is what forgiveness gets you, I thought. A silent seat at a table you were never really invited to. I stepped away from the seating board slowly, pretending to readjust my purse strap, pretending to not notice the heat rising behind my ears. A tight, polished smile still on my face. My version of war paint. As I began walking toward the back lawn, I heard Delphine's voice again, clearer, louder, and clearly meant for others to hear. "There she goes. Always so understated." That word. Understated. I knew what it meant in Delphine speak. It meant plain. It meant poor. It meant forgettable. I didn't stop walking. My feet moved across the freshly manicured grass like I belonged there, even though I felt more like a misplaced chair than a guest. Each group I passed turned their attention back to themselves, just fast enough to make it look casual. The violinist played something elegant near the champagne station, and the sound floated in the air, like a reminder that everything here had been rehearsed except me. I approached the edge of the tent where the cocktail hour was spilling into lawn seating. That's when it came. Her voice again, cutting through the polite murmur like a knife in a silk sheath. "Hey, love that dress. So vintage poor girl chic. I swear I had one just like it in high school, before Goodwill stopped carrying them. Laughter bubbled up. Not loud, not cruel, but deliberate. I stopped just for a second. Not because I was stunned, though I was, but because I felt my body do what it used to do as a child. Freeze, then brace. The dress I wore had belonged to our late aunt. I'd altered it myself. Small stitches by hand to repair worn seams. It wasn't designer, but it carried a kind of dignity Delphine couldn't buy. I placed my hand on my hip, smoothing down the fabric. Not to fix it, but to feel something familiar. I could feel the eyes. Even when they didn't meet mine directly, I could sense the weight of their glances. I kept walking. I had mastered the art of movement through discomfort, of collecting myself in real time. No one said anything to counter Delphine's comment. Not Elise. Not Uncle Hal, who once called me the real backbone of the family back when no one was recording. Instead, a woman I didn't recognize leaned toward the man beside her and said, "She's brave to wear something so textured." Textured. What a word. Used like a compliment, shaped like a dagger. I offered a nod and a smile, and then kept going. Inside, I was burning, not with shame. That had come and gone over the years, like rain showers I didn't bother covering for anymore. This was something else, something closer to clarity. They didn't see me, not really. They saw a placeholder, a cautionary tale in flats, someone who refused to perform and therefore didn't belong. I reached the back patio area where drinks were being refreshed. A long table sat empty except for a tray of sparkling wine flutes, neatly arranged, untouched. As I stood there, trying to decide whether I should even pick one up, I heard her again. "Mare?" Delphine called out. I turned slightly. "Be a dear and hand out some glasses, will you?" I glanced around. No servers, just me. My hands were empty, the tray was full, and no one stopped her. No one said, "She's a guest." No one said, "Let her be." That's the thing about silence. It doesn't just hurt. It confirms. I stared at the tray. The glasses were chilled. A few had condensation forming on the stems. I felt the same, present, functional, but entirely out of place. There was a time I would have walked away, or frozen, or made a joke to cover the sting. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I took the tray. Because fighting in front of strangers never changes anything. Not then, not now. The glasses rattled gently as I carried them through the garden, weaving past sunlit chatter and curated smiles. I nodded when someone looked up, smiled when someone squinted like they almost recognized me. Most didn't see me at all. No one said thank you. One woman, tall, tan, the type who always looked like she'd just stepped off a yacht, took a glass and said, "Bless you," like I was staff clearing her salad plate. I gave her the kind of smile you give to someone who's mispronounced your name for years and thinks it's charming. This is what good girls do, I thought. They hold trays. And their tongues. Laughter rippled from the left, sharp, mean, performative. I didn't need to turn. I knew. A trio of cousins in matching blush dresses stood nearby. One was mimicking my walk, slow, hunched, tight-lipped. The others giggled, sneaking glances to gauge if they'd pushed it just enough to stay innocent. Behind them, I caught one of Delphine's sorority friends lean toward her husband and whisper, "Is she a guest or the help?" It wasn't the comment. It was how easily it came. I spotted Uncle Hal standing 10 feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Our eyes met. Then he looked at his watch. That was all it took. Laughter is permission. And everyone here was fluent. I returned to the bar and set the tray down. My hands shook, not from the weight, but from the truth settling in. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't that they forgot me. They had reassigned me. Delphine stood waiting, holding a hanger with a crisp white button-up and black slacks. "This might fit better," she said, casual like she was offering gum. "Less distracting." I stared. "You're not serious." "Don't make this weird, Mare," she smiled. "Guests are starting to notice. Just blend in." I didn't move. Her voice softened, always more dangerous that way. This is about making people comfortable. You get that, right? The clothes were exactly my size. I'd RSVP'd late. She shouldn't have known I was coming. But she did. This wasn't a reaction, it was premeditated. A cousin passed by, not slowing. "Sparkling next round?" she said, like I was invisible wallpaper. I didn't speak. I was still deciding. Later, I'd remember the pause. The second between what they assumed I'd do and what I chose instead. I took the clothes, walked to the guest bathroom, locked the door, sat on the toilet with the light off. The hanger lay across my lap like a verdict. I didn't cry. That part of me had dried up long ago. I sat there, still in my wrap dress, earrings dangling, birthmark visible. They don't see me, I thought. They've already cast the role. I'm just the extra filling it. I don't know how long I stayed there. 2 minutes, maybe 10. Eventually, I stood, folded my dress carefully and placed it in my bag. Then, one button at a time, I put on the uniform. Delphine's version of Meredith. I looked in the mirror, not to admire, just to confirm. I didn't look angry, I looked alert. And that, more than anything, scared me. When I stepped out in the staff uniform, no one blinked. That was what stung most. No double takes. No awkward, "Wait, why are you?" Just quiet acceptance, like this was always my place. Maybe, to them, it was. People rarely question a story they're comfortable with, even if it's false. I moved through the garden like a centerpiece, present, silent, decorative. Then I saw her. My mother sat under the pergola, swirling Chardonnay in one hand, the other idly fanning herself. Her hair was pinned back in that practiced way, navy dress spotless, pearl earrings gleaming, always ready for a camera. She hadn't greeted me, hadn't smiled, but she saw me. I know she did. I walked toward her slowly, unsure if I was heading for connection or another cut. When I got close, she lifted her sunglasses and looked me in the eye. For a second, I thought maybe this would be different. Instead, she said, cool and measured, "Straighten your collar, dear. People are watching." That was it. No. "What are you doing in that uniform?" No. "Is Delphine out of her mind?" Not even a concerned, "Are you okay?" Just an adjustment, a correction. Her voice like iron draped in silk. I said nothing. Laughter rang out somewhere nearby. Plates clinked. It all felt far away. Then she turned to the woman beside her, someone I didn't recognize, and said, without even a glance back, "She's always been sensitive." The woman gave me a brief, polite smile, then looked away. That word, sensitive, has followed me for as long as I can remember. My mother's favorite way to dismiss me without sounding cruel. It meant, "You're not wrong, but I won't acknowledge it." I stood there a moment longer, waiting for her to say something else. She didn't. She sipped her wine and whispered something to her friend. Dismissed. I turned and walked away. My face was calm. My body felt like it was splintering. The uniform, crisp an hour ago, now felt rough against my skin, like it had absorbed her silence and was pressing it into me with every step. That's what I am to her, I thought. Not a daughter, not even a person. Just a detail she's learned to edit out. I remembered being 12, holding a permission slip for the school assembly. I had signed up to speak, nervous but proud. That morning, she looked at me and asked, "You're going to stand on stage like that?" She didn't say, "With your birthmark." She didn't have to. I backed out later that day. She wasn't loud. She was composed, controlled. The kind of cold that doesn't shiver, it numbs. Halfway across the patio, someone handed me another tray. Bruschetta with goat cheese and microgreens. I looked down. It felt heavier than the last one. Not because of the food, but because of who had just watched me take it. I didn't protest. Didn't refuse. I took it. But this time, I wasn't carrying appetizers. I was carrying evidence. I didn't notice the camera until later. I was mid-step, face turned, hands full. But someone made sure it caught everything. A voice called out, Delphine's assistant, Camille, sharp and chirpy like always. Okay, let's get everyone together for the group photo. Family first, front and center. People started to gather near the garden steps. Men in linen suits adjusted their collars. Women smoothed their skirts and checked their teeth in phone screens. A few kids darted across the lawn, herded quickly into line by someone more organized than I'd ever been allowed to be. I stood off to the side, still holding the tray, unsure whether I was expected to serve during the photo or simply disappear behind a hedge like a shadow avoiding direct light. Meredith, someone called. A cousin, Marla, I think. Your family too. Get in here. It wasn't an invitation. It was a compliance check. So I walked forward, careful not to jostle the tray. I set it down quietly near the bar and joined the group, slipping into the far edge of the lineup where the lighting was uneven and the photographer didn't bother adjusting the angle. We smiled. Or rather, most did. I followed suit, chin slightly tilted, eyes straight ahead, the way we're taught to present ourselves without being remembered. The camera flashed once, then again. Camille clapped lightly and announced, Perfect! #ready! It wasn't until later, much later, when I was home and out of the uniform, that I saw it. On Delphine's social media feed, a carousel of images from the afternoon, complete with captions like, Family means everything such as Bledsoe gathering blessed. There we were. Well, there they were. I was cropped, not entirely gone, just barely visible on the edge, like an afterthought. My face softened by a filter, or maybe blurred on purpose. It was subtle, but I noticed. And so did others. One comment read, Such a beautiful family. I don't recognize the woman on the side. Another chimed in, Oh, just one of the helpers, I think. That one hit like a slap I'd already trained myself not to flinch from. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I saved the image to my phone. Not to share, not to fight, just to keep. Because memory, when edited enough times, starts to doubt itself. I received a text later that night, from Jenna at work. We weren't close, but she was observant. Hey, were you at that event Delphine posted about? I thought I saw you but wasn't sure. You looked different. I typed, Yeah. Then deleted it. Then typed it again. Yeah. No punctuation, no elaboration, no lie, but nothing whole either. Because how do you explain being present but not welcome? Seen but not acknowledged? Captured but not counted? I scrolled back to the photo, zoomed in. There I was. Not tagged. Not centered. Just there. A figure between light and meaning. That image, that caption. It wasn't just a photo. It was a message, a revision. They hadn't cropped me out. They'd cropped what they didn't like. And that, more than anything, was the story of my place in that family. Not erased, just reshaped, softened, hidden, quieted. I could have cried, but I didn't. I locked my phone, stood up, walked to the bathroom sink, and splashed cold water on my face. Not to soothe anything, but to feel something real. Something not filtered. When I looked back at my reflection, I saw more than the birthmark. I saw someone they couldn't blur forever. That was the last time I let them decide which parts of me belonged in the frame. After drying my hands on a linen towel in the guest bathroom, I stepped back out into the late afternoon sun. The laughter had shifted to a lower hum, softened by cocktails and photo fatigue. I took the long way around the pool, past two women discussing Pilates instructors, and some cousin bragging about his kid getting into Vanderbilt. That's when I saw it. A narrow folding table set up just behind the catering tent, shielded from the main view by potted palms. On top, a clipboard, a schedule printed in color-coded blocks, and one clean folded name card. Meredith Hoyt, Station 2. Next to it, a line item that read, Napkin refill, drink rotation, bus round, 3:45, 4:15. My stomach didn't drop this time. My breathing didn't shift. The only thing that changed was my posture. Shoulders back, chin even. Delphine appeared behind me, like she'd been waiting for the curtain cue. "Oh, good," she said, holding a glass of rosé and smiling like a real estate agent showing you the guest bathroom. "They found you. Honestly, it's like pulling teeth getting consistent help in this town." I turned to her. "You wrote this." She took a slow sip, eyes never leaving mine. "I helped organize. You said you wanted to be part of things." I stared at her. No blink, no flinch. A pause. "Now you are," she added, as if that was the end of it. It almost was. I reached for the name card, flipped it over, and creased it down the center with 2 fingers. Deliberate, controlled. I slipped it into the pocket of my slacks. She let out a soft laugh, the kind meant to dismiss and belittle at once. "Always so dramatic over nothing." "No," I said, voice calm. "Over everything, but not this time." Her smile flickered. She looked at me for a beat longer than usual. Then she adjusted her bracelet and turned away. I didn't watch her leave. I walked into the supply tent, my breath even, my jaw steady, and paused just inside. A rack stood by the far wall, covered in plastic garment bags. One had my initials written on blue masking tape, M.H., tailored. I pulled the bag down and unzipped it. Inside was another uniform, crisp white shirt, pressed black slacks. The cut was precise. The fabric was new, not a last-minute backup. This had been made or chosen specifically for me. My hand slid along the shoulder seam. This wasn't for if I showed up. This was for when. They had planned for my participation. They had assumed my obedience. A cousin passed behind me, barely looking. "Oh, I thought you were doing centerpieces or something," she said, reaching for a stack of drink stirrers. "Didn't know you were full service." I didn't answer. There was no rage, just recognition. Back outside, I could hear Camille's voice calling out table assignments for plated desserts. A final phase of the afternoon carefully choreographed by Delphine and whoever she'd convinced to co-sign her version of reality. I folded the uniform carefully, creased at the sleeves, hem-aligned, and carried it out in my arms like a statement. At the dessert table, I paused. Guests milled nearby, half focused on cutting into lemon tarts and chocolate mousse. I placed the clipboard on the linen-draped table, next to the candied walnut platter, and laid the folded uniform neatly on top of it. It was all there: my name, my task list, the schedule, the proof. I didn't announce anything. I didn't need to. Whoever chose to look would see, and whoever didn't. They weren't worth correcting. I walked back through the garden, this time slower. Not because I was defeated, but because I was finished pretending I had to move quickly, just to stay out of the way. Every step I took felt like reclaiming an inch that had been taken without my permission. One guest glanced at the clipboard. Another leaned toward it, brow furrowing. I didn't stop to watch. They could decide for themselves what it meant. I'd already decided what it didn't. I used to think silence made me safe. That night, it made me invisible. And I was done being invisible. As I walked toward the back of the garden, something caught my ear. An old microphone being tapped. "Check, check," someone muttered into it, followed by a faint burst of feedback and polite chuckles from the crowd. They were setting up for open remarks. Camille had mentioned it earlier while directing the dessert carts. It was Delphine's idea, I was sure. She loved a spotlight she could script. A small wooden platform sat under an arch of fairy lights, flanked by folding chairs and a low vase of white hydrangeas. People had begun to gather, fanning themselves with paper programs printed with Delphine's logo. I stood just beyond the hedge line, not hidden, but not in plain view either. From there, I could see the space clearly, a place I'd once longed to occupy, now carefully avoided. That platform triggered something old, something I hadn't thought about in years, but my body remembered it before my mind did. I was 12. It was the week of the spring assembly. Our school did a yearly event where one student from each class was selected to recite a short piece. Some did poems, some gave a welcome speech. I had been chosen to lead the pledge that year. A small role, But it had meant everything to me. I had practiced for days, pacing the living room and reading from a printout until I could say every line without stumbling. I even memorized how to pause at the right moments, how to stand still with my hands folded just so. That morning, in the school parking lot, just before drop-off, my mother leaned over in the driver's seat and said, "Honey, maybe it's better if someone else reads it today. You know how lighting can be harsh." I had blinked, unsure of what she meant. I looked down at the sheet in my hand. "Why? I've been practicing." She gave me a soft smile, but her eyes never met mine. "Your birthmark. It might be distracting under the stage lights. You know how bright it gets." It wasn't said with cruelty, just fact, like a weather report. I sat frozen for a moment before nodding, stepping out of the car with that sheet still gripped in my hand. By the time I made it to the front office, I had told them I wasn't feeling up to it. A girl named Jenna took my place. She read with a shaky voice, mispronounced 2 words, and got a standing ovation anyway. I sat in the back row and mouthed every word. I didn't cry then either, but I carried the silence home like a new scar. Back in the present, I brushed my fingertips across my cheek, right where the birthmark curved down toward my jawline. I'd stopped wearing makeup over it a year ago, not out of defiance, not even out of pride. Just exhaustion. Hiding something every day starts to feel like feeding a lie you didn't agree to tell. I glanced back at the makeshift stage. A younger woman now stood at the microphone, reading a thank you speech from her phone. People clapped politely. A man nearby nodded and whispered to his wife. "She's Delphine's intern, I think." I stepped away from the hedge. The air felt heavier the closer I got to the edge of the seating area, but I didn't stop. I didn't plan to speak. I wasn't looking to hijack anything. I just wanted to look at the stage head-on, not from the shadows. And when I did, something shifted. It wasn't pain, it was release. I thought of that girl in the auditorium, the one who sat in the back, who wanted to speak, who wanted to be seen. I thought of how many times I'd let people place me just outside the frame to protect their comfort. It didn't sting anymore, because I saw her now. She hadn't failed. She hadn't faded. She'd just been waiting for me to remember her. I took a breath, smiled to myself, not for a photo, not for anyone watching, just because I could, and turned away from the stage. Not because I was scared, because I wasn't hiding, and I was done letting anyone decide what parts of me were too much for the light. The next voice I heard wasn't mine, but it was about me, and it wasn't kind. Delphine stood on the platform, microphone in hand, looking like she was born under a spotlight. Her white jumpsuit caught the fading sun, making her glow in the way she always orchestrated. Never too much, just enough to be admired, but not questioned. "We just want to take a moment," she began, her tone syrupy, "to honor the people who made today so smooth. My amazing team. Camille, of course, and, well, even Meredith is here." The crowd turned their heads. My heart didn't skip. It didn't race. It waited. Delphine scanned the lawn until her gaze landed on me, half in the shadow of a pillar near the bar, arms folded loosely, no tray in hand for once. "She's wearing what I can only describe as bold and brave," she said. Some laughed, low, agreeable chuckles from people who'd never risked wearing something for the sake of memory instead of image. "And I mean," she added, lifting her champagne flute, "it takes real confidence to wear a high collar with that kind of birthmark. But hey, she's always owned her uniqueness." A pause. Then more laughter. Scattered, uneasy, but real. Someone near me whispered, "That's not cute, right?" I felt nothing in my body move. No twitch, no blink. I let the words sit in the air, like ash falling from a fire I hadn't started, but had been breathing in all my life. Delphine smiled, coy and confident, as if she hadn't just undressed me in front of 50 people without laying a finger on me. And that was the brilliance of it. The cruelty came wrapped in charm, coated in sisterly familiarity. That way, if I reacted, I'd be the one making it a scene. The sensitive one. Again. But I didn't give her the performance. I gave her nothing. I held her gaze as the clapping trickled off, and the DJ reset the music like nothing had happened. And then I turned and walked. Not because I was hurt, not even angry. I walked because standing still would have meant staying complicit. I passed by a server who offered me a glass. I declined. My throat felt dry, but I didn't want to sip something and have to smile. I didn't want to perform comfort. I kept walking until I reached the side tent, where earlier that day I'd seen the catering schedules. The place was mostly empty now, only the hum of a generator and faint clinks of cleaned cutlery coming from the back. I ducked inside, not to hide, but to breathe. I opened my phone. The photo from earlier, the cropped group shot, was still saved under a folder I titled Proof. Now I opened notes. I typed 2 words. Document everything. If they wanted a version of the truth tailored to fit their comfort, I'd have my own. Unfiltered, uninvited, unforgiving. Delphine had shown me her script. It was time I started writing mine. I stepped back out into the late light. Air cooler now. The crowd slightly thinned as guests drifted toward the dessert tables. I didn't rejoin them. I walked behind the catering station, back to where the clipboard had been placed that morning, with my name, my station, my assignments. It was gone. Not just misplaced, gone. I checked the trash, under the linen bins, even peeked inside the cooler, where Camille liked to stash extras. And then I saw it, on a small metal table near the rear exit, tucked under a tray of fruit skewers. A note, handwritten in round, rehearsed cursive. She's exactly where we expected. MH handled Station 2 without resistance. No one questioned it, as always. No name signed. No direct accusation, just confirmation. Delphine didn't need to say it was her. The handwriting was Camille's, but the content had her fingerprints all over it. My name wasn't just on the guest list. It was on the plan. They hadn't been surprised when I showed up. They had banked on me showing up and folding, but I hadn't folded. Not this time. I tucked the note into my clutch, zipped it shut, and stood up straight. No more hesitation. The clipboard wasn't where I left it, and someone had added a note, with my name on it again. I found it tucked in a drawer beside the drink station, underneath a half-used pack of cocktail napkins. The paper was bent, creased in a corner, like it had been shoved there in a hurry. But it hadn't been lost. It had been placed. There was a sticky note attached, in Camille's handwriting, clear as ever. MH, handled Station 2, without complaint. Told you she'd blend. No one suspects. It wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. The note didn't need a signature because the message wasn't meant for me. It was written in the language of people who never imagine you'll read what they say about you. But I did. My stomach didn't sink. It curled inward, folding around something sharp. A kind of understanding I'd spent years dodging. They weren't guessing I'd fall into place. They counted on it. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the note, then another, and one more, of the clipboard beneath it, with my name and shift schedule still visible in printed blocks. Proof. Not for justice. For memory. I had learned the hard way that silence doesn't protect you. It just clears the room for someone else's version to take root. I walked out of the drink tent and around the side path, past the hydrangea beds, toward the screened porch that faced the east side of the house. I remembered Camille mentioning Delphine would be doing interviews here for content, branding pieces, a family image to be sold later. That's when I heard their voices, not rehearsed, not sweet, not for show. My mother's tone came first, low but clipped. You could have just told her not to come. All this? Then Delphine's voice, unapologetic, confident. She needs these little slaps. She always drifts until she's reminded of her place. There was a pause. My feet didn't move. Rhea again. Still, the uniform was a bit much. Delphine laughed. Better than the pity she's used to. I felt every word settle on my skin like dust. The kind that doesn't shake off, just seeps in. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I held my breath, not out of fear, but clarity. There it was. The whole picture. Delphine didn't slip up. My mother didn't forget. This wasn't disorganized or clumsy. This was a script, and I had been cast without consent. I turned away from the porch, quietly. No sound, no stomp, no need to alert them. Some truths don't require confrontation. They just need to be witnessed. Back behind the dessert table, I stood still for a moment, watching people line up for mini cheesecakes and tiny creme brulees in plastic ramekins. I took out my phone and opened a draft email. Subject line, "In case I go quiet." I attached the 3 photos I'd taken, then added a 4th, of the group photo from earlier. Cropped, filtered, with my face barely visible. I didn't send the email, I just saved it. Some things you prepare not to share, but to survive. And then I walked back into the crowd, phone in one hand, plan forming in the other. This wasn't about fighting anymore. Not in the way they expected. They were waiting for me to crumble. For the scene. For the outburst that would confirm their narrative. I wouldn't give it to them. There would be no more compliance. Only exposure. By the time I returned to the patio, the air had shifted. The sun had dropped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the dessert tables. People were milling about more slowly now, softened by wine and social fatigue. But the atmosphere wasn't the only thing that had changed. The seating chart had been moved, rearranged, reprinted, and posted on a fresh easel under a canopy. Neat rows of names gleamed beneath plastic. I approached it slowly, scanning line by line. My name wasn't there. Again, not even as staff, just gone. Camille was nearby, tapping at her phone and giving a guest directions to the restroom. She looked up at me, but said nothing. She didn't need to. I turned, calm on the outside, and walked toward the main tent. I knew where to find Delphine. She always planted herself near the center of attention, somewhere with good lighting and better proximity to the photographer. And sure enough, she was there, laughing politely, with a man I didn't recognize. Her body language said polished, generous host. Her eyes caught mine as I approached, and she excused herself from the conversation. I stopped a few feet from her, no smile, no pleasantries. "You removed me," I said. My voice was quiet, but clear. She tilted her head slightly, as if confused. "Excuse me?" "From the seating chart," I said. "Again." Delphine blinked, then shrugged, a subtle motion that sent years of resentment down my spine. "I assumed you'd rather float. You've always said you hate these things." "I RSVP'd," I said. "You confirmed. You placed me on a task schedule. You had a uniform made." She took a slow sip from her glass, then looked me dead in the eye. "Meredith, this is a celebration. I don't understand why everything with you has to be so heavy." "Because you weaponize lightness," I said. "You act like everything is breezy, casual, kind, and somehow I'm always the one bleeding from it." That was when the whispers started. People nearby pretended not to listen, but their stillness gave them away. No one fakes that level of disengagement unless they're watching something they shouldn't be. Delphine's voice dropped to a hiss. "Do you really want to do this here?" I straightened my shoulders. "You already did." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her smile flattened, professionalism slipping. I saw the flash of discomfort cross her face, the loss of control. "I don't want to fight with you, Meredith." "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm acknowledging." And with that, I turned toward the guests who had unintentionally become an audience. "For anyone wondering," I said, loud enough but without raising my voice, "I wasn't invited as staff. I wasn't late. I wasn't difficult. I was just inconvenient." A ripple moved through the group. Some looked down. A few exchanged glances. Delphine's fingers clutched her glass tighter, the red wine sloshing just below the rim. I stepped back, not rushing, not hiding. I had nothing left to prove to anyone here. The ones who got it didn't need a speech. The ones who didn't never would. As I reached the garden gate, a woman I barely knew, a distant cousin or one of Delphine's social circle, rushed up to me. "Wait," she said, holding something in her hand. "You dropped your phone." I hadn't even noticed. She handed it to me, screen still lit. The draft email I'd saved earlier was open. She glanced down, then up at me. "The photos," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I took the phone and locked it without answering, because that wasn't the question. Not anymore. I told her the truth. Not for comfort, but because it was time someone else knew. She gave me that careful look, half concern, half curiosity, then stepped back into the flow of guests, leaving me alone with my phone, my thoughts, and a full-body clarity that felt colder than the air around me. I didn't go far. I wandered into the reception tent, not because I needed to retrieve anything in particular, but because I was curious what else they had done without telling me. That's when it happened. A man in a navy blazer stepped into my path, clipboard in hand, eyes skimming a checklist without pausing. "Can you prep the next wave for the photo wall?" he asked, barely glancing up. "They're getting ready for the sponsor shots." I stood still, said nothing. Before I could respond, a photographer behind him barked, "We're losing light. Get her to the left side, just not too close to the center branding." The man nodded toward me. "She's one of the event girls, right?" I didn't blink. I didn't nod. But I felt something under my ribs shift. Delphine was nearby, chatting with a sponsor, holding court in that way only she could. She saw the exchange, saw me being mistaken for staff, and didn't move, didn't correct, didn't care. I walked away. Not quickly, not angrily, just enough to signal. This isn't my role anymore. At the far end of the tent, two staffers were rolling up a banner with thick white font across a pale pink background. "Sisters United, a family story of strength, support, and selfless love." The letters made my skin itch. One of the screens nearby played looping footage, soft lighting, handheld shots of guests hugging, laughing, clinking glasses. Delphine's voice came in over a music bed, polished and edited. "Our family's journey isn't perfect, but it's real," she said, smiling into the camera. "We've overcome, we've rebuilt, and we've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about showing up." I felt bile in my throat. This wasn't just a party, it was a staged campaign, a video project sponsored by a local women's group Delphine had been cozying up to for months. A documentary, of sorts, meant to show real family dynamics and highlight her as the compassionate glue holding it all together. And me? I was the contrast, the offbeat sibling, the one who didn't quite match, didn't quite smile right, didn't quite get invited. I wasn't part of the message, I was the underscore to her grace. In the promo materials stacked on a side table, I flipped open a pamphlet. There were quotes from Delphine, quotes from our mother, even a sentence from Camille talking about the resilience of women who quietly support their families through seasons of silence. That's who I was to them. A season, not a person. I walked behind the stage, into the shadows, and pulled out my phone, opened my photo folder, scrolled to the image I'd taken earlier, of myself in the staff uniform, birthmark unfiltered, no lighting tricks. Just me. Just truth. I uploaded it to the cloud and labeled it proof, not fiction. Then I opened the camera, switched to front-facing, and snapped a photo right there. No makeup touch-up, no filter. Caption: "This is the part they'll crop. I won't." I posted it. No tags. No explanation. The truth doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it just needs visibility. And then I left. The tent was humming with soft jazz again, the kind Delphine liked. I didn't walk fast. I didn't slam doors. I didn't say goodbye. As I passed through the back gate toward the lot, someone stepped out of a black SUV parked just beyond the valet stand. A woman, mid-40s maybe, tailored blazer, flat shoes, confidence that didn't need announcement. She looked at me like she already knew me. "Meredith Hoyt?" she asked. I paused. "Yes," she smiled. "I believe we have an appointment." The SUV door opened, and with it, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. It came not from the vehicle itself, but from the way the woman stepped out. She wasn't flashy. No loud heels, no designer logo blinking under the sun. Just clean lines, calm presence, and the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to convince anyone of her authority. She closed the door behind her and walked directly toward me. I wasn't wearing anything remarkable. No makeup left. My hair slightly frizzed from the humidity, flats scuffed from gravel. But she didn't seem to see any of that as a flaw. "Meredith Hoyt?" she asked. I nodded. She didn't smile in a performative way. Her expression was steady, warm, but grounded. "I believe we have an appointment." I blinked. "We do?" She tilted her head slightly. Not in the calendar sense, but in the kind that matters. She extended a hand, not to shake mine, but to guide me gently toward the shade of a nearby olive tree, out of the line of sight of the main event. From the angle we stood, I could still hear Camille announcing raffle winners, and Delphine laughing a bit too loudly into someone's ear. We stood for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." My spine stiffened slightly. "You were 10, maybe 11. It was early March, raining like it meant it. You were walking home from school with a manila folder over your head." My throat tightened. She continued, "I was in my store, Fabric and Notions, corner of Oak and Marshall. You stopped under my awning for 5 seconds. You never looked up, never asked to come in. Just stood there, clutching that folder like it was armor." I remembered the folder, thin and soggy. The rain had bled the ink on the report card inside. I hadn't wanted anyone to see me, especially not with the wind sweeping my hair away from the birthmark. "You didn't cry," she said softly. "And that's when I knew you were already doing something brave. Not performing pain, just carrying it." I felt heat build behind my eyes. Not tears, but recognition. "I've followed your work since," she added. "Quietly. The writing, the charity work, even the pieces Delphine takes credit for." That last line hit a nerve, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at her more closely. She reached into her satchel and handed me a clean white envelope. "We'd like to offer you something real." "What is this?" I asked. "A space. One where you're not a background prop. One where your story isn't rewritten in someone else's font." I hesitated, then accepted the envelope. She looked at me again, not with pity, but purpose. Then, unexpectedly, she knelt slightly, bringing her eyes level with mine. It was disarming, but not condescending. And then she said it. "Princess, are you ready for your surprise?" I didn't move. My breath caught in my chest. Around us, conversations kept humming, but something in her words made everything mute. The last person who ever called me that was my Aunt Gloria. Before she passed, she used to say it when I was scared to enter a room or ask a question in public. "Princess, are you ready?" And somehow I always found courage where I hadn't a moment before. Delphine had hated it, said it made me soft, said no one respected a woman who still believed she was anyone's princess past kindergarten. But this wasn't about royalty, it was about being seen. From across the lawn, Delphine turned. She had seen the exchange. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did. Rigid, alert. Her wineglass didn't move. I didn't look at her again. I looked at the woman in front of me and nodded. Just once. She smiled. Not with triumph, but with relief. "This way," she said, leading me back toward the SUV. Before I stepped in, I turned once, not toward my sister, not toward the crowd, but toward the space they left between us, so that if anyone asked later where I went, they'd remember this moment. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than it should. A letter, a contact card, a schedule. But it wasn't the weight of paper. It was the weight of being chosen, not to play a part, but to live a truth. I didn't leave quietly. I left like someone who had just been found. The SUV door clicked behind me with a muted thud. No fanfare, no applause. Just the low hum of the engine, the leather seat warming beneath me, and the envelope still pressed against my chest like armor. We didn't drive off right away. Devia gave me space, something no one else at that party seemed to understand. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't tell me I was brave. She just sat with me in that clean, still air until I was ready to exhale. "I can tell them you changed your mind," she said gently, her hand still on the wheel. "I haven't," I replied. "I'm just taking a second to remember what it feels like to walk away because I chose to, not because I was pushed." She nodded. "Take all the time you need." I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter welcoming me to the Women's Narrative Fellowship, a program outline, and a laminated pass to the kickoff dinner happening downtown later that evening. I glanced back toward the garden gate, just barely visible through the rear window. Delphine's voice drifted on the wind. Faint, clipped, still in control. The sound had always grated on me, but now it sounded small. I stepped out of the SUV one more time, not to return, but to take a breath on my own 2 feet. The sun was beginning to lower, shadows stretched long across the grass. I turned toward the gravel walkway that led to the exit, heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. I didn't hurry, and that's when I heard it. Small, quick footsteps behind me, lighter than any adult would make. I turned around just as Inez, Delphine's daughter, appeared beside me. Her dress was slightly wrinkled from playing, her face flushed. She didn't say a word. She simply reached up, innocent, gentle, and touched my cheek, right where the birthmark curved near my jaw. Her fingers lingered there, unafraid, curious, but not cautious. "It's like a moon," she whispered. "I like it. It's pretty." No one had ever said that to me, not like that, not without hesitation, or subtext, or apology. Something inside me crumpled and stood up at the same time. "Thank you," I said, my voice uneven. "That means more than you know." She nodded like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Then, just as easily, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't hug her back right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to receive something that pure from someone so unaware of the damage the adults around her had done. Eventually, I placed my hand gently on her back. "You be good, okay?" She nodded again and ran off toward the dessert table. No one called her back. No one asked where she went. And that's when I knew. The cycle wouldn't end by shouting. It would end by walking away. I turned back toward the SUV. Devia stood beside it now, door open, waiting. She didn't ask what happened. I didn't offer. But as I reached her, I said softly, "Tell her I'm not staying because of what she did. I'm leaving because I finally see what she never will." Devia looked at me, really looked, and said, "You don't owe anyone your presence when they profit off your absence." I smiled. "Exactly." Inside the car, I finally opened the schedule. My name, typed in bold, was listed next to a panel on narrative reclamation. I would be one of the keynote guests. My hands didn't shake, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I was certain. The silence I used to wield like a shield? It now served as a boundary, not a wall, a perimeter, a filter. We drove slowly past the front of the house. A few guests still lingered on the porch, sipping champagne. Camille spotted us and froze. She tapped Delphine's shoulder. My sister turned. Our eyes didn't meet, but I looked past her anyway, past the edited photos, past the fake speeches, past the curated grief and convenient amnesia. She didn't wave. Neither did I. I didn't feel erased. I felt edited out. And there's a difference. Erasure is clean, surgical, a conscious choice to remove. But editing? That's more insidious. Editing leaves just enough of you to pretend you're still there, even when everything that made you matter has been trimmed away. By the time the SUV pulled onto the main road, the notification had already come through. Delphine had posted. I opened the app with the kind of detachment that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to see, but still needing to see it for yourself. There it was. A carousel of carefully curated images, sun-dappled laughter, champagne flutes mid-toast, cousins hugging in coordinated florals, our mother sitting regally on the patio like a weathered matriarch holding court. Caption, Bledsoe sisters, always stronger together. Family first, sisters united. I swiped through them slowly. Every shot cleaner than the last. Every expression rehearsed. I was absent from every frame. Even the group photo, the one where I'd stood awkwardly on the edge, trying to disappear without fully vanishing, had been retouched. Cropped tighter, recentered. The caption beneath it read, "Grateful for every face in this photo." Every face, apparently, except mine. I leaned back in the seat, phone resting in my palm, and stared out the window. Trees blurred by. It was too late in the afternoon for anything new to start, but too early to call it done. Across town, brunch was underway. Delphine was hosting, of course. Post-event celebration. Her version of a debrief, but dressed up in mimosas and seasonal frittata. It was there, in the middle of her monologue about brand partnerships and vendor gratitude, that someone interrupted. "Forgive me," the woman said, setting her glass down. "But that woman from last night, the one who left in the black SUV, who was she?" Delphine blinked, caught off guard. "Oh," she stammered. "Just someone who used to be part of things. A distant cousin." The woman frowned. She didn't feel distant. She felt central. There was a pause. Then a second guest added, "There was something about her presence, like she wasn't there to impress, just be." Another leaned in. "She's not tagged in any of the photos. I thought it was some sort of branding, like the silent sibling, or maybe a statement." Delphine's smile thinned. Her knuckles whitened slightly around the base of her glass. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Not because of a confrontation, but because absence, when curated too precisely, becomes a louder presence. My mother, sitting a few chairs down, stirred her coffee. Slowly, precisely. She didn't look up, didn't offer a name, didn't blink. She had mastered the art of neutral silence, of letting the world think she hadn't chosen a side, even as her inaction drew its own boundary lines. No one mentioned the birthmark. No one asked why I left. But the air was thick with it, an unspoken knowing that settled into the room like smoke from a fire no one admitted had ever started. At the end of the table, Aunt Cora spoke without lifting her gaze. "It's funny," she said, slicing into her eggs. "You delete someone from the story, but people still remember they were there." No one responded. No one needed to. And in that moment, the structure Delphine had spent the entire event building began to fracture. Not with a bang, but with a murmur. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed again. It was a message request on social media, from someone named Julian. I tapped it open. "Hi, Meredith. I was the photographer at the Bledsoe event. I kept a few shots, ones that weren't approved. You looked free. Want me to send them?" I stared at the message for a long second. Then I smiled. Maybe this time, the story would start in full. The image arrived a minute later, and for the first time, I saw myself, centered, unfiltered, still standing. Julian had sent 3 photos. One was of me holding a glass of sparkling water, half smiling, mid-conversation with someone I barely remembered. The second was sharper. Me alone by the dessert table, back straight, eyes forward, as though I'd just remembered something important. But it was the third that made me freeze. In the last image, I stood in the center of the lawn. Not on the edge, not behind someone's shoulder. Full frame, clear as day. My birthmark visible in the late afternoon light. Hair falling naturally. No smile, but no fear either. Julian's message followed. "They didn't use these, said they didn't match the brand, but I thought you should have them." I stared at the photo, fingers resting over the screen. There was a time I would have cried, seeing myself that exposed. Now I only saw something I hadn't realized I was missing. Evidence. Not just of me being there, but of me being whole. Not background, not edited. Me. I didn't post it right away. I took a walk first, through my neighborhood, slow and steady. Past the blue house with the porch swing, the bakery that always burned the scones a little too much, the empty playground where I used to sit and journal before I had the nerve to call it writing. Then, as the sun dipped behind the church steeple, I opened my app. I posted one of the photos to my personal feed. No caption, no hashtags, no explanation, just the image. 5 minutes later, I followed it with another post. This time, I uploaded Delphine's group photo, the one she'd cropped and centered around her narrative. The one with my arm half visible, my face blurred out by what she'd call aesthetic cohesion. In the caption, I wrote, "One of these is curated. One of these is complete. Both are real, but only one tells the whole story." And then I closed the app. I didn't refresh. I didn't wait for likes. But they came anyway. Within 20 minutes, the comments began trickling in. Quiet DMs, heart emojis, surprise from people who hadn't seen or heard from me in years. A message from an old classmate. "I always thought you disappeared. Now I see you were just being erased." Another, from someone I didn't recognize at first glance. "Thank you for showing up, even if they didn't make room for you." I didn't respond right away. I just sat with the weight of being seen. Not performatively, not as a symbol, just seen. An hour later, I checked Delphine's profile. Her event post was gone. No apology, no explanation. In its place, a single sentence post. "Narratives are messy. Sometimes love means letting go." No tags, no photo, no mention of a sister. Ria never posted anything, never texted, not even a missed call. It was almost laughable, the precision of their silence. Like they thought that if they simply refused to engage, the version they wanted would hold. But it didn't. Because silence may blur the lines for a while, but eventually the image sharpens again. And when it does, the details you tried to erase are often the ones that speak the loudest. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, scrolling through the photos again. I reread the caption I'd written. "One of these is curated. One of these is complete." And I whispered out loud, for no one in particular, I was never meant to fit in their frame. Then I looked up at the stars, scattered, quiet, and unapologetic in their placement. So I built my own. The invitation came 3 weeks later. But this time, it wasn't from my family. It was printed on textured cardstock, tucked inside an envelope with a handwritten note from Devaya. Nothing scripted, nothing performative, just, "You deserve the mic. Not because of what you've endured, but because of what you've seen. D." I stared at the card for a long time before opening my laptop and blocking out the date. It felt unburdened. There was no expectation to impress, no dress code, just space, just presence. The event was held at a community center 2 towns over. Not grand, not sterile, just honest. The type of space where every chair squeaked a little and the coffee was always too strong, but nobody minded because the words mattered more than the backdrop. They called the event Reclaiming Visibility. I liked that. It didn't sound like vengeance. It sounded like process. Inside the room, folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. At the front sat a modest podium, a microphone, and a sign that read, "Your story is the truth." I was slotted last on the program, not because I was the headliner, but because that's how you close a conversation, with someone who understands where silence begins and where it ends. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium with the envelope in one hand and a folded piece of notebook paper in the other. The lights weren't harsh. The audience wasn't rehearsed. No one averted their eyes. I took a breath, not to calm myself, but to feel grounded. "I used to think being unseen was safer," I began. I told myself invisibility was dignity, that it meant I wasn't making waves, that I was keeping the peace. A few heads nodded. But peace isn't silence, and silence isn't always safety. Sometimes silence is just survival in a house that doesn't know what to do with you. The words left me calmly, not choked, not cracked, just clear. I was cropped out of a family I never stopped trying to belong to, I continued, until I realized that wasn't failure. It was refusal. Refusal to shrink into someone else's storyline. Refusal to disappear in the name of decorum. I didn't name names. I didn't recount specifics. I didn't need to. Because pain has a tone, and people recognize it even when it's not labeled. This isn't revenge, I said, voice steady. It's restoration. For the little girl who stood behind the school curtains and never got her turn at the mic. For the young woman who learned to iron out her identity to fit into frames that weren't built for her. For the woman now, who finally chose to build her own. I closed the notebook, tucked the envelope underneath it, and stepped back. Silence followed, not awkward, but full. Then someone clapped, then another. I didn't need the ovation, but I accepted it. After the session, a woman around my age approached. She didn't say, "Great job," or "That was powerful." She said, "That was true," and that was enough. Later, while packing up my things, someone asked if my family had ever responded to the photos. The post. The message I had shared. I shrugged. No one reached out, not directly. But I knew they saw it. My aunt unfollowed me the next morning. My mother never mentioned it. But Inez? She liked the photo, the one where I stood alone, no edits, no caption. Just me. I left the venue in the late afternoon, sunlight pooling across the sidewalk. I didn't rush to my car. I walked slowly, fully. Outside, the air was clear, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty but earned. I touched the side of my face, not to cover, not to check, but simply to acknowledge. I thought of all the years I had tried to disappear, tried to keep the peace by giving up my place, and I thought of what Davia had told me when I first stepped into that SUV. You don't owe anyone your presence when they profit off your absence. No one had erased me. They just failed to see what stayed when the editing stopped. And now I'd told the story myself. Not from behind a curtain, not with a script I didn't write, but with my own voice. And that made all the difference.